Okay. And I can mute the participants. Good, here come the people. All right. So, next week, no class, spring break. And the two things I already mentioned to the people here, this Saturday is red versus blue. Welcome to everybody, worth extra credit. You do not have to be advanced. You'll practice doing a live competition here. There's the second of a whole series of these we're going to be doing. And tomorrow is the Cyber Club. These are both extra credit, except if you're enrolled in CNIT 11, in which case the Cyber Club meeting is your class meeting. But I'll be there. Yeah, so that's a normal class meeting for you. But anyway, I'll be there demonstrating Android vulnerabilities. So bring along a cell phone if you want to test it, iPhone or Android, and we'll test your apps there. Anyway, so let's take a look at the news. Got 10 minutes before the official stuff here. This one is pretty interesting. And that one might be interesting. I'm not quite sure. Yeah, quite a few interesting things. No, well, you never know. All right, so here's a few interesting news articles. So Putin is now going to censor the internet to remove fake news, which means, and also anything which harms people's trust in the government. This is the law that's been this way in China for a while. Anything that harms the people by causing them to question the government is illegal. And it's going to be the same in Russia. I thought it always was, but apparently they're changing it so it's easier for him to just take things down without any pretense of a trial, although their idea of a trial is pretty fake anyway. And there's a huge push, as you know, from both the left and the right to do the same thing here and make all the news filtered for political desirability first. I don't think we'll be glad when it happens, but it sure looks like it's going to happen. Both the left and the right are anxious to have it happen, and there doesn't seem to be any large number of people that have any doubts about how wonderful it will be to filter the news and censor the internet. So we're headed there. Last year, Facebook said they're hiring 10,000 censors to censor the internet, and Twitter's going to have to do the same thing. I think they're already hiring them, so that's what we're going to have. So far, they don't have any clue what to remove, though. So they're sort of spinning their wheels. Anyway, Android has a new version called Android Q, and you can get it on an emulator and on a real device. So this might be fun for the Android hacking class. We can download Android Q on an emulator of some type. I'm not sure if we can easily do it on Genymotion, but anyway, might be worth checking it out to see what it does. And I found instructions how to take your real phone and go to Android Q, and also how to take your real phone back from Android Q back to Android 9 if it messes it up, which of course it might because it's a beta. I haven't seen a list of what the new features are though, or why you would want to do it, but presumably there will be some new features. There usually are. So this is a new one, and Trump is behind this. They want to wipe out HIV in America, which is quite a change for the Republicans. And anyway, they have a plan, which sounds pretty good. Apparently, I didn't know this, apparently with current treatment, if you get the right treatment, it takes the virus load to zero and you are not infectious of other people. So the only people actually spreading HIV are people who don't know they have it, or people who have it and are not getting proper treatment. So they're going to have a bunch of programs to educate people and test them and give them the treatment. Apparently, the treatment is getting very good. So that would be very good. You can probably greatly cut down on the amount of HIV now that we have effective treatments. And on the other end, of course, then there's the people that refuse to take the treatments we have. So the unvaccinated students are suing for the right to go to school unvaccinated and spread diseases which in fact are already epidemic in school. This was chickenpox, and there's already been a chickenpox epidemic there from people who refuse to get vaccinated. So this was pushing a lot of hot buttons like freedom of religion, states' rights, whether it is really your right to not vaccinate your kids, and whether they really lose their right to an education for that or not. We're going to have battles about that. And this is tied into the censoring the internet too. A lot of people want to block fake news about vaccination risks on the internet. along with blocking everything else. They say that they're causing this problem. This is the general solution of the left, is to muzzle speech so that you can pretend a problem is solved. I'm not a fan of it. I think muzzling speech doesn't really solve a problem, but I'm definitely in the minority here. Most everyone agrees that the solution to things is to stop people talking about it. So apparently there are strong similarities between these devices, and apparently they added some new feature to the Boeing to prevent stalling in air, which I think probably means that when you try to slow down, it won't let you slow down. And they didn't tell the pilots how to use it. The pilots, one group of pilots said they had no training at all. The others said they had a 1-hour training delivered by an iPad, which they didn't pay much attention to. And then this thing turned on and they couldn't slow down or something, and that's why they crashed. Same thing in both crashes. So it does sound like there's a problem with the Boeing. And this is what I heard from the beginning, is that it's not that it's broken, it's that it has some feature that is hard to use and the pilots don't know how to use it, which is not exactly the same thing as being broken, but you certainly don't want to be riding that plane. Anyway, so Elsevier, a very controversial company, left their users' passwords online with an unexposed server. Elsevier is pretty much a crooked racket, and this is why the Aaron Schwartz died because of this. Elsevier has a monopoly. They're a Swiss company. They have a monopoly on scientific research. If you want to get a job at a major college like UC Berkeley, you have to publish peer-reviewed research, and the way that works is you have to publish in certain journals that are completely controlled by this one company. They're a monopoly, and they charge enormous amounts of money. You have to pay something like $1,000 a page to publish an article in them. You have to contribute a bunch of free time reviewing other people's articles to be on the committee. Then they charge $10,000 for the subscription. They pocket money at every step of this, and they lock it up so nobody can see the research, which they paid for with tax money. There's a huge movement over the last 20 years of researchers saying this is all just garbage. This is part of why I put all my videos on YouTube where everybody can see them. I'm paid for by tax money. It seems to me like everything I produce should just be freely available to everybody. And a lot of scientists feel that way. But I can do that because I'm at a community college and I do not have to impress a formal college board. If I was at UC Berkeley, I would not be able to do this. This would be a waste of my time. I would have to publish in these exclusive journals. That's the only thing that is considered significant. And if you fail to publish enough papers, they fire you. So it's a disturbing thing. And anyway, now they've leaked out their passwords. There's a rising movement of rebels refusing to publish here and just dumping their papers directly on the internet so everybody can see them. But the only people that can do that are people that already have tenure, that no longer have to impress people. So, we're living through the end of this stuff. The cult of the ivory tower and all these weird rules. So apparently you can extract Android KeyStores from apps. I saw this. So the KeyStore is supposed to be the safe place to put secrets like passwords in an app. And apparently using this tool, you can remove those. So I think that means you can expose secrets from inside the app. I haven't done this yet. This would be a good project for the Android hacking class. I may or may not be able to get this working this semester, but I would like to see how powerful this is and whether it really reveals secrets or not. It might. It might be yet another step forward in Android hacking. Google Plus is shutting down, and so the Internet Archive is trying to preserve all the Google Plus posts before they throw them away, I think at the start of April. MySpace just lost the first 12 years of music completely, and almost nobody noticed it. Who knows if MySpace even still exists, but apparently it still exists and had a bunch of stuff, and they just messed up a server migration and lost it all. So anyway, that's one thing about cloud services, which many, many companies have found out to a problem. If you put something in the cloud, that does not mean you don't need another copy of it. Because of course, anything you put in the cloud could go down if those cloud services go down. So you really ought to keep a copy. Anyway, let me turn off this beeper on my phone.
Can you put it on multiple clouds?
Yes, you can, and that's often a trick. That's why a lot of people get cloud backup. Like, if you put it on 2 different clouds, that would seem pretty good.
How many clouds are there? Like Google Cloud, Dropbox?
There's a lot. There's Dropbox, there's Amazon, there's Google, there's.
Salesforce has their own cloud.
I think they do. Salesforce, Rackspace, Microsoft has Azure. There's a bunch of them. And so you totally could. I've even done that before. You can have a Gmail account. You can forward it all to Yahoo accounts. You have another copy of the mail. You can do that as long as you don't have really large amounts of data. If you have really a lot, then it gets expensive. But yeah, it's a very good idea. You got to have some kind of backup. This is what gets people in ransomware. They get infected, it encrypts all their stuff, then they have to pay the ransom because they don't have any backups that are offline. You really ought to have a backup that you're not connected to all the time on a removable hard drive or on some service you're not always logged into, so that if your machine gets infected and encrypts everything it can see, you don't get every copy. Anyway, all right, so I think we can go up to the official stuff, which is here. This is 129S, and we're going to do Chapter 8 and the first part of Chapter 9 because they're short. All right, so Chapter 8 is quite short and not terribly new, so this won't take long. So access controls. Once you have decided that you know who somebody is because they've given you a name and a password and you somehow kept track of that with the session with something like a cookie, now you have to limit what they're allowed to do. Now, a lot of web applications just don't bother with access control. All they bother with is authentication, and that's a problem. As you'll see, anyway, here's the failures of access control. If your access control fails vertically, you can escalate from user to administrator. If it fails horizontally, you can move from one user account to another user account. And there are other kinds of context-dependent access controls, for example, accessing the stages of shopping in order, where you first pick login, then you pick a product, then you specify a payment method, and then you buy it. And if you're able to do those out of order, you've again exceeded the correct access in a horizontal way. So that's vertical privilege escalation. That's horizontal privilege escalation, where you can read somebody else's stuff. And here's where you do something that you should not be able to do according to the logic of the app, like going to shipping a product to you without actually passing through the part where you pay for it, for example. So this is a very common situation called unsecured direct object access, or also called security through obscurity. This is like hiding a key under the mat. There is no actual barrier to prevent anybody from coming in the door. You've just hidden the key and you hope they won't find it. So this is very common. You might have someplace like a /admin directory, and when you go there, you have to log in. But after you log in, it redirects you to some place way down here like do admin menu. But that do admin menu is not actually protected by any kind of permission in the operating system that remembers who you are. It's just that they hope you won't find that if there isn't a link to it. And after you log in, you go there. So if you were to make a bookmark of this other page and then log out, you could come back and still do administrative tasks even without passing through the login stage. This is very common, and it comes about for the same reason as everything else we've talked about in this class, because you have multiple servers and multiple administrators, and somebody's putting up a function, and they do not really have a good ability to get the authentication tokens or authentication database from whatever other system is there. So they don't really have a way to make sure who you are when they're writing that other page. So they hope you just won't find it. All right, here comes a question. Let me see if I can get this thing to let me up there. Here we go. My understanding is that Dirbuster scam those URLs. Yes. No, not really. Dirbuster and also Google, for that matter, and Skipfish, which is Google search engine, tend to find these. You would think nobody will find something if it has a goofy name like this, FF457. In fact, Google finds it pretty fast, and there's a lot of tools that find it. Mostly what they do is they just keep a list of all the common directory names and try them all. The Google bot, this is the entire mission of Google, is to find everything they can find. So they're very good at finding all the files in the directory. That's why there's an endless chain of security breaches where somebody put some file on a web server and they didn't mean for it to be public. And after a while, people find it. You really shouldn't have it on the server at all if you don't want the whole world seeing it, or at least it should have permissions so that the normal user can't get there. Just thinking no one will find it in a hidden directory is not a good bet. I say Dirbuster, of course, in principle, if you really put it behind a directory with like 25 random characters in the directory name, it probably would not be found. It's the same thing as passwords. If your password was really 12 random characters, nobody would ever find it. But nobody does that. They have something simpler based on a word that can, in principle, be found in a list in most cases. Anyway, so that's the game. So if you can predict identifiers, you might get in. I remember one of the first web pen tests I ever did. A friend said, I made this website. Can you check it out? And I went to the home page, and it was login2.html. So I just went to login1. And that was the earlier version of login that you could just log in with the default password. So 5 minutes later, I owned it. I said, how did you do that? And I said, well, it's not that hard. When I saw something called login2, I said, I wonder what login1 would look like. And that's what you do. Look for names and guess other names related to them. It is very common. I've done it myself a million times. My website is an example of every bad practice because I'm the same reason developers do it. I'm just rushing to get things done and I don't really care about the details. So typically there's a whole bunch of early versions just left on the server, not removed, not blocked because you're working on things and rushing and moving forward and not bothering to go back and clean up. So anyway, all right, so here's a multi-stage function. So you select the new user, then you select department, role, then you enter username and password. There are a lot of operations where you go through a series of steps, and you don't want people doing these steps out of order or skipping steps. And so you ought to have some kind of enforcement to make sure this happens. And we mentioned before, the right way to do this is to have a hidden field on each page with a random number that's different every time. So when you go to the next page, it checks to make sure this person really came from the page I served them back here. That way, they can't do things out of order. But that's a lot of work, and a lot of people don't bother. So here's an example. You might pay for a book, and then they'll just send you to a download link to download the book. And if you just send that link to somebody else, they can download the book for free. A lot of online shopping works this way. The actual product is not, in fact, protected by permission. They just hope you won't find the URL. This was the case with one of the photo sharing sites. I think it was Picasa, or perhaps one of the other major photo sharing sites. They showed that everybody's private photos were in fact open to the whole world. If all you had to do was guess the URL. And it turned out the URL wasn't very long and you could write a script to try them all. And so they leaked out everybody's private photos. Might have been Instagram. It was one of those online photo sites made this mistake. Then you can have restriction. Now, if you're using Apache, for example, you have the ability to block access to certain directories. And the problem is that you have to specify some way to identify the forbidden thing by method, URL, path, and user role. This was true of the Android hacking that we did with an app last week, where a directory was really important, like passwords, but they only blocked access to passwords, not passwords /. And the second structure of the directory name, which led to the same place, was not identified by the access control list, so you could get through. This is quite common. Another one is verb tampering. The normal verbs anybody uses are post and get. Get to view a page and post to send up data like a password. But what if you send another verb like get with 2 T's? The answer is, you might say a web server should reject this as invalid, but a great number of web servers will just accept it and treat it as a get because they just don't care. And another thing that happens is the option method. The options method is just supposed to return you the header and nothing else. But many web servers actually implement the options method by performing a get and then blocking some of the output on the way back to you, which would sound okay. But what it means is if I have an administrative operation like get admin.html ? User equals administrator, I can send it with the options method. It will pass through the access control, which doesn't see it as a get. It will hit the server, which processes as a get, and then does the administrative action, and then doesn't send the results back to me. And this is why you have the blind projects, you remember we'll talk about, where very often when you're hacking websites, you're sending commands to the server, and they're being executed, but you do not see the output. So you have to get good at inferring whether it worked or not from indirect clues. Anyway, that's a common case here. So you might have parameters, refer, or location-based access control. These are common ways to limit what people do on websites, and they're all very insecure. Parameter-based, we talked about. This is where you tell if someone's an administrator based on a parameter that came from the user. Obviously, they could just use burp, put that parameter in, and be the administrator. Now, you shouldn't be trusting any data that came from the user. Referrer-based, we already had this in the projects. A lot of people look at the referrer to tell whether you came from the right page, but you can just forge the referrer, just like you can forge the from phone number in a phone call. And so again, this is something that will work most of the time against normal people, but it will not stop a malicious attacker. And location-based is huge. Location filtering is everywhere. They block you from seeing sports events because you're too close. They block you from seeing certain videos that are banned in your country or something, and all you have to do is trick it. Sometimes you can just change settings on your machine to appear to be in another country. Another common thing you do is use a proxy, so your traffic comes out in another country. Apparently they do this a lot in Iran. Several years ago, my students and I did an Iranian captured flag competition, and one of the challenges was they had a map of the world, and you had to come from every country. You had to find proxies that make you appear to be in Britain, appear to be in France, appear to be in Israel, just everywhere. because apparently they have this problem so much in Iran that they all get very good at using proxies to come out somewhere else, which is really because of us. Iran announced about 6 years ago they were going to turn off the internet entirely and make their own internet because they were so tired of America hacking them all the time, which we are totally doing. We hacked them like crazy. We hacked them so many times with Shamoon and Wiper and Stuxnet until they just said, we're going to quit using the internet, you mean rotten people. Because we're the #1 aggressor in cyberspace. I mean, we whine about people hacking us, but we hack everybody else 10 times more. And a lot of them are pretty fed up with it. So, all right, so now you can compare 2 user accounts. So I can log in here as administrator and log in here as an ordinary user, and Bert can actually compare those two and show you exactly where they're different. So you can see what's happening. And here, if I go to a top-level administration page here called admin.ashx, the non-administrator gets a non-authorized page, but the administrator gets a page with options like list users and add new user and such. And that looks good, but the problem is there are other administrative pages available for the administrator up here, like new user and your details. And even though the primary administrator page is not available, the other pages are in fact available even when you're not logged in. So if I go down to this one, list users, that should give me a list of all the users, even if I'm not logged in as the administrator, I can still go to that page and see it because it doesn't actually check who I am on every page. This is very common. All right, so that's direct access to methods. And you may be able to guess from one URL or request what else would happen. All right, so you walk through the app while logged in as an administrator and note the URLs of high privilege resources, then be a low privilege user and try going back to there and see if you can still get to any of those pages. They should all give you error messages, but they very often will not. All right, and then you can try methods. So use a normal method like post or get, then go back and try other ones. Invalid methods, options, things like that, head, other methods that shouldn't do much, but see what they do. All right, don't assume that users will not find URLs or identifiers. There's a lot of ways they might find them. One simple way is your staff will leak it like any other secret. As we all know, the NSA has their hacking tools and they leak them. Even if you have the 25-digit random character, it might leak. I think I told you years ago, I found a major medical company. I found their top secret password just online, just in a config file. It was a 25-character random password, and it was just blowing around in the breeze on the internet. Because what happens is somebody in your company will get an order from the executive, we're going to the cloud, take all our code and put it on GitHub, take all our data and put it on Microsoft Cloud, and the person who commands this does not know that those files contain secrets. This is, the usual thing. The right hand knows not what the left hand is doing. So you can't trust anything that comes from the user. You have to check it to make sure it's valid. So check your access control permissions. And this means if you want to have this work at a company, you have the reason why Microsoft made so much money with domain controllers. You have to have one centralized point of control. This is what domain controllers are in Windows domains, and web applications need the same thing. There has to be one authentication server. People always use the same method of proving who they are, and it puts out something like a session cookie, which is used everywhere. If you have multiple ways of deciding who somebody is, you will quickly lose control. So that's the right way to do it. And you might have second factors like IP address or something to limit people. All right. You can't trust anything that came from the server, and you might need to have two-factor authentication for important things like administrator login. I was talking to somebody just earlier today, and they were surprised Google switched to YubiKeys. YubiKeys are little USB sticks you buy, and they just have a digital certificate or something like that on them. So every time you log in at Google, you have to put in your YubiKey to log in. So the password alone is not enough. And Google said they did this a year ago, and an entire year they've never been hurt by any more phishing scams. And phishing is deadly. Almost everybody falls for phishing. In fact, many people tell me, when you're a professional pen tester, they will say, you can't do phishing because we know phishing will get in and that's boring. You said, well, you're going to do something about it? No, that's too much bother. That was this college. We're talking about how this college can't go to two-factor. The Board of Trustees won't let them do it because they think it's too much bother. And I say, well, we just have to wait until enough of them get hacked and then they'll change their mind. But phishing attempts at the college all the time. Every month or so, I see it in the faculty email. People send emails saying, go here and log in. And so the best cure is two-factor. And the easiest two-factor is the YubiKey, but there has to be something more than your password required to get in, or you're going to fall for phishing emails. Anyway, so that's central access control, just like a Microsoft domain controller. If you have one central place where you make security decisions and enforce them, it's much better. And if you read the book about DevOps, which I forgotten the name of for a moment, there's written by Spaff. Gene Spafford wrote a book about DevOps. And the point is, this is how you move from being a sort of amateur company that's disorganized, where people are undoing each other's work, and you knock it off and get professional. You have a central server where everything is organized, and then you have version control, where everybody has the right version of everything because you force them to use something like Git or some other proper version control system. These are things you do which are just necessary to get anything done right, and they're something you grow into as you move from amateurs to a professional company. Sort of like HIPAA compliance. My students helped companies move up to HIPAA compliance, and the same thing applies. When you are an amateur beginning company, you have things like everybody logs in as root on the servers. And this is for amateurs, because if you're a professional company, you need to have a log of what everybody did. Everybody has to use their own account. You have to have the ability to fire one person and remove their account without affecting the others. And you just can't have people sharing an account. That's one of the many sloppy practices that amateurs use that professionals have to knock off. And it's the same thing here. You have to have a central authentication server that handles all this. And then you can handle the complexity of a real business. You know, at a home user, you can just have administrator and limited user, but at a company, this is more what you have. You've got all these things, create application, edit an application, all these things, and the administrator can do everything. There's a bunch of other levels where people can do something, like the administrator over customer accounts, but not over in a company accounts, the back office help desk, the user help desk. You know, this is the way it really is. Real businesses have many different roles and many different layers of privileges. And this is why Microsoft makes so much money. Active Directory totally gives you the ability to do all this. And it's the only thing that really provides what you need for that.
What about doing DNS? So if they're not using your DNS server, can you verify it somehow?
That is another thing that you usually do not allow at any company that gets tired of security breaches.
I mean, there's internal DNS, and then they just set up an external DNS that routes to 888, but it's through them that they go to 888.
You could do that, but typically you do not use public DNS servers at all. You use your own DNS server so you can limit what it does. And you force
one internal, one external.
Yeah, you have one external, which is what external people use to get to your resources, and that's the authoritative one. You have an internal one, which is what your company staff uses to get to the internet, and that one you lock down for security, you limit what it does so they can't reach the forbidden websites, and you force them to use it so you can log everything they do.
Yeah.
That's what you do. It's DNS is such a good way to track what your users are doing that you really want to force all your company users to go to your server where you can watch it. Then you will know who's doing the bad thing. And you know, it's just the thing. When you're a small group, you trust everybody. When you grow to a certain size, you realize there's a certain amount of crime happening all the time, and you really should have controls to detect and respond to the crime that's happening. And you know, this the same thing happens. I remember I went to the Rainbow Family, and you know, Rainbow Families was a group of hippies that went to camp out in the woods, and they were fine. And then they grew to about 10,000 people, and then they started having rape and robbery and fights among themselves. And just like all the hippies, they discovered, gee, you know, you kind of do need like cops and laws and stuff. Even when you think we're all one family, when you reach a certain size, some of you are actually bad. And then you need all those frustrating, irritating rules and controls that you were hoping to get away from. So here's a couple of PHP things worth looking at. So if I go there on this server, here's a couple of PHP insecurities. So this one is weak typing. PHP, and for that matter, Python, are what's called weak typing languages. Now, I grew up in the old days with a language like C, and C is considered a structured language. If I want to say I equals 1 in C, you can't do that. It won't let you. You have to tell it what I is first. So if you're going to use something like I, you have to go up here and declare it as an integer. And if that's a certain kind of integer, and there's another kind called long, and there's float and double, you can't use a variable without first telling it what kind of variable that is. And if you then want to put something else in there, like I equals hello, it will give you an error message. You can't put text in an integer. That is a strong typing language. And it means you have to understand what all the types are and you have to make them. Now, things like Python and PHP will totally let you do this. I equals 1, A equals hello, and so on. They will just guess what type it should be. So if you set it equal to 1, it'll make it an integer. Then you set it equal to hello, it'll change it to a string, and so on. This means it's not really clear what you're trying to do, and it can lead to disasters like this. So if I do user and password and log in, it tells me I'm invalid. User and password are not good credentials. But I'm going to be able to log in. So the PHP uses this comparison in the script. It takes the MD5 of the password and compares it to this value. Now, that is just a hexadecimal number that happens to start with 0E and happens to have nothing but numbers after that. That's all. However, this, if I log in with this password, I will get in. Let's do that, and then we'll talk about why it worked. I think I have to be admin. It might be admin. Let me see. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to show you admin or root, perhaps. Let me try root. And now I'm not going to be able to show you this thing live, but I'll talk about it anyway. Yeah, so I got in as root. Okay, so the root password is that, but that's the wrong password. If you take the MD5 of this number, you do not get this 0E199. You get this number, 0E462. Now, the reason this works is because this, when you set something equal to this quantity, PHP guesses what kind of variable it is. And since it is 0E followed by numbers, it assumes it is an integer, which is, this is the way you write 10 to the 199 trillion. 0E199. It assumes that this is 0 raised to the power 199 trillion, which is 0. And this is also 0 raised to some large power, which is 0. And this comparison changes the string into a number and compares it to another number. That's the problem. What you really have to do to fix it is this one, triple equals. And many developers don't know this. Triple equals means these variables have to agree not only in value, but in type. So this has to be a string, and this has to be a string that's exactly identical. So all I did was add one equal sign to the script, and now I'm not going to be able to log in with root and that password. And there are a lot of examples in JavaScript, PHP, and Python where outrageous things happen like this because variables are misinterpreted by the computer as meaning something drastically different than what you think they are. Anyway, here's a weak typing again. So if I do user and password, I log in and it says invalid credentials. If I try to log in as root and password, I'm invalid credentials. I can't get in. But this here, if I go to I'll go back forward. If I go here and look at the URL, up here you can see the URL. This is using the improper practice of putting the username and the password up here in the URL, which is, and the problem is I can change the typing by doing password with open and closed brackets. If I do that, it will have a variable named password, but it will now be interpreted as an array. And when you compare an array with a string, it's going to fail to compare and create an error message. And it's very easy to write code where an error is interpreted as success. So that's the point. Again, all I did was add a bracket, and that made this variable type not match an equal sign. I think I mentioned before, I had some of my online quizzes I was using last summer had the property that if you just left the answer blank, you would win for the same reason. Because a blank answer caused an error message, and the error message was interpreted as success. It's pretty easy to do that. So here's the PHP I used for this string comparison. A password correct equals 0. So if it compares the correct answer to the password and it's 0, then it says fail. If it doesn't equal 0, then it says you won. And if there's an error because the password is a different variable type than correct, then this is false, and it interprets that as winning. It's very easy to do that. Anyway, that's a game there. So, all right. Anyway, those are just the notes about it. I'm not going to bother with the rest of that stuff right now. So I want to go on to the Cahoots, and then we'll talk about the next chapter. So let me bring up my Cahoots. And I should have favorites. And this is 129S, chapter 8. I think it's this one. And in this class, I get to use the music, so here we go. By the way, I was teaching a class where they didn't want the music, and I learned something awesome. If you're playing Kahoot music and you don't like it, you just right-click the tab and mute it. That's pretty awesome. I didn't know that. Because people are asking, why doesn't Kahoot give you an option to turn off the music, which they don't. They say, we don't need to. Your browser gives you the ability to turn off the music, which is very nice. And the other parts of the sound still work on the other tabs and the other applications. That's very nice. What's that? What's that? That's true. Right. There's a 4-digit one, but you weren't here for it. Anyway, that reminds me, I should start a list here. This will do. It's going to be 129S Kahoots. And it's 318. Okay. All right. So that may be enough people. I'll give it another 5 seconds. Eight online, and maybe 6 in the room, but I appear to have Kahoot abstainers again. Such is life. All right. So, if you access pages out of order, what attack is that? Okay, that's exploiting a logic flaw. All right. If you read somebody else's Gmail, what's that? That's horizontal privilege escalation.
Fuck.
Oh, sounds like these guys are not muted. This one, I know the mute all feature doesn't work very well. Anyway, you can't argue with the price, but Kahoot does have a few defects. Anyway, so there's Zoom. All right, so what technique is security through obscurity? I should get rid of that. Okay, that's unprotected functionality where you can actually use it. You just hope you won't find it. And which defense can you bypass with proxy servers? Okay, that's location. The whole point of a proxy server is it makes you appear to come from a different physical location. All right, let me make a recording of the winners. Mateo, Caitlin, okay. These all look, Caitlin and Win, we know who that is. Good, I know who these people are. So let's carry on with the next bit, which is chapter 9 here. The first piece of chapter 9, which is going to be databases. And we'll talk about SQL injection in more detail. And this is preview. That's a PDF file. How did that happen? There's the one I want. All right. So, all right. So data stores are where you store customers, credit card numbers, addresses, and all sorts of good things. And they're usually SQL, either Microsoft SQL, Oracle, or the open source MySQL, but you can also put them in XML. And LDAP is used for things like Active Directory logins, lightweight directory access protocol. It's another way things are stored in a structured value. And all of these are high value targets. That's usually what hackers mostly want, is to steal a whole database full of stuff like credit card numbers or passwords or something like that. And the number one vulnerability in the world, the most important thing to know in the whole world of security, was SQL injection until about 2 years ago. This was responsible for something like 95% of all the stolen data in the world. This one problem. The only reason why I think it's no longer the #1 problem is Amazon. Amazon created their cloud storage system, and they made it so by default there's no password. So for the last year or two, I think actually more data has been stolen from unprotected Amazon buckets than from SQL injection for the first time ever. Somebody found a way to be even stupider than this, and that was Amazon, but now Amazon has finally knocked it off. SQL injection was discovered by Rainforest Puppy 15 years ago. It is brilliant, and at that time 11% of the web is vulnerable, and 11% of the web is still vulnerable, because every time somebody wises up and fixes a website, a new generation of students graduate from colleges like this and make the same mistakes again. Because if you take the development classes in the computer science department, they will not teach you how to avoid this. It is a very strange world we live in, where we use generations of developers, each trained to make the same mistakes they've always been making, and then they hire another staff of security people to clean up after them, but that's where we're at. So the problem is interpreted languages. All these vulnerabilities, the ones you've done in the command injection and the SQL injection, all rely upon a very sloppy coding procedure where you do not actually write an application in one language. You take a language and you build a line of code which you then pass to another language to reinterpret. This is like taking orders and translating them into German and then having someone try to guess what you're saying with your imperfect translation. That's what leads to this. And all these go this way. So you saw the ping injection, where instead the programmer was not able to really program a ping, they just took your IP and added it after the word ping and then executed it in bash. So if you put a semicolon here, it will do the ls also, because the bash takes that line of text and treats it as if a human typed it in. And it might have other functionality besides just doing a ping. So if you actually compiled your code and used only one language like C, this would be very unlikely to happen. The fundamental reason why it happens is you build a line of code and then feed it to an interpreter, which tries to parse that line of code and find separators like semicolons and HTML tags and so on. And that's the fundamental problem here. So you can bypass a login. So if someone has a SQL command like this, select star from users where username is Marcus and password equals secret. The intention of the developer is you can only get in if you put in a username of Marcus and a password of secret. But if I put in a username of admin apostrophe, then the code turns into this, select star from users where username equals admin apostrophe. And if I do this, if I just put in admin apostrophe alone, it'll cause an error. But if I put in admin apostrophe and then 2 dashes here, all right, I think that should be there. I think there's a defect in my slide. Anyway, if I put in admin apostrophe and 2 dashes, then this line turns into this. User equals admin. The 2 dashes begin a comment. So all the rest of the line is ignored. So now the only condition is username equals admin. It does not examine the password, and it proceeds to the next statement, deciding that this condition is true. So you end up logged in as administrator, and that's what you typically have with SQL injection. So entering this username is the simplest kind of SQL injection. Just a single apostrophe or 1 equals 1 dash dash will take any kind of condition and change it into whatever condition the developer intended to test, or 1 equals 1, and then ignore the rest. So you have a condition here which is probably going to be false, but 1 equals 1 is always true, and false or true is true. So this magic string will log in on quite a few systems, although not too many, because there are sometimes different kinds of apostrophes, and there are often different comment characters and so on. This is the simplest case, but in practice, you have to try a lot more to really break in. And that's why capture the flag competitions are so important, because you get more realistic troublesome issues and you get more practice about this. So we'll do this one. And let me just go through this SQL injection demo, which is the most important thing to learn. Aside from not using open Amazon buckets, which is pretty simple, but it's currently causing more trouble. So my SQL injection is here. I reset the database, okay. So I have a table of users and a table of social security numbers, and they have a username, which is the same in both tables. This has a numeric field called isAdmin that is either 1 or 0. This has a text field, which is social security numbers containing those fake social security numbers. So if I do a select query, here, I select everything from SQLOL users. The name of the database is SQLOL, And the name of the table is users, and that will give me this table. So this is the select query that gives me the data in that table. All right, that is a valid query that runs. I could get data from the other table. Now, what's more interesting is to restrict by a particular name. So let's do this one. Yeah, now, where you have this, what you almost always have in a real case, you have a clause where name equals something. So here, it gets only the record that satisfies the condition, where the name matches something. So that's fine. But now, if my name has an apostrophe in it, like O'Neill, then I get an error message because this is the command, select star from SQL where name equals O'Neill. So it's going to look for name equals O, and then it's going to expect a SQL command here like and or, and instead it finds Neil, so it crashes because this is now an invalid command. This should never happen. No matter what name you put in, you should not be able to change the structure of the command. All you should be able to do is put in a name, and it should either find it or not find it, but you should not be able to make it confused about what part of the input is a command and what part is a name. But because you chose this sloppy programming technique where you use PHP to create a line of text, and then you pass it to a SQL interpreter, which tries to parse it and match up the apostrophes, you created the ability for a person to inject commands into a name, which are then executed on the server. That's command injection. I should not have the power to break the syntax. Only the developer should be able to break the syntax by changing the commands. All I should have the ability to do is feed data, which will either be found or not found. But because it's sloppy, I can now inject commands. So here's the one that will give me everything. This one, I put in a name, which is Fred apostrophe or apostrophe A equals A. So this is a double condition. The name is Fred or A equals A. None of the names are Fred, but the condition A equals A is always true. So this combined condition is always true. And now I get all the data again because I have a where condition, which is always true. So it gives me all the data in the table. And the point is, here I have a select query. I can do everything I want, but in real databases, you don't get that. What you get is something like a login. So all you get is something like this, like a search. You can search for a user by name. So I can search for Herb Derper, and it shows me only their name, nothing else. So the developer intended for this to just be a lookup function where you can look for a person. But because it's poorly implemented, I can do things I shouldn't be able to do. And if I put in a name with an apostrophe in it, this is what vulnerability scanners do. They just feed in something that will trigger an error message. So now I get a syntax error. And like I say, the syntax error doesn't reveal any secrets right away, but it tells you that I have the ability to do something very bad to the program. This is normally when you're hacking, you send a lot of random data, that's fuzzing, and then you look for an error message or just crashing. And when that happens, you know you found a vulnerability where the data I put in caused something wrong to happen on the server. I should not be able to do anything except either get found answer or not found answer. I should not be able to crash the app, but I can, and that means a more careful input will let me in. So this is the command that finds the names of the databases on the server. And so here this is username like this. This is the username I fed in. All that mess. And the way the server read this was select username from users where username like nothing, then union a second command. So you can do a select command and you can add a second select command to it to get more data. So it first looked for usernames where the username is empty and it's not going to find any. Then it adds another query where I control everything here. So I look for table schema from information schema tables. This is an automatically generated database that MySQL creates, and it calls it the table schema. So now I get a list of all the databases on my server. And there's one here called SQLOL, which I'm going to attack. And so down here, the second thing will find the tables in that database. Again, just targeting the pre-generated usernames, pre-generated databases. So now, I must have fouled it up. Oh, I think I had extra space at the end. Yep, I had extra space at the end, and that'll do it. This happens to students too. That space will break it because it's inside a quoted string. So the SQL database contains a table named SSN and a table named users. So now that I know that, I can go here and I can find the columns within the SSN table with a similar query. And so this tells me that the SSN table contains a field called name and a field called SSN. And now that I know the name of the database, the table, and the columns, I can ask for the data I want by just directly asking for it, and that's what this one will do. This is going to go to the database called SQL, the table called SSN, and then get the fields, name and SSN, and connect them with a colon and print it out. This is how they stole all the data from many, many web servers. And this is still going on all the time. There's automated processes scanning the web for it. There's automated people harvesting it. This is still a major vulnerability affecting a lot of people. It's just that we're in a temporary period of time when Amazon managed to find something even stupider out there without washing it out for the time being. But this continues to be a major way to steal data. So that's one way you steal data from a database. And what's more fun is you can upload a PHP shell. So if I do this, it'll actually write a shell, so I now have the ability to execute arbitrary commands on the server. So if I put this in, say, sam2.php, this will take this PHP code, PHP system request command, and put it in a file called sam2.php on my server. So if I run that, it does not give me an error message. It doesn't find anything. And this is what I was telling you earlier. When you're hacking into a web server, frequently you can't see what you've done. All you see is either an error message or no error message. And you have to understand, if there's no error message, that means it understood this command and performed it. So it created a file in the temp folder named sam2.php. I can't see any direct evidence of that, but the fact that there was no error message means that it did. So I can view that file if I go into the temp folder, which is here, TMP on this server, and then sam2.php, I now see a file. Now it's giving me an error message because the PHP command is trying to execute a variable called command, and I have to specify that. So I have to do cmd equals ls here. And now it will perform the ls command. This is called the PHP shell. I've now created, from SQL injection, I've created a file on the server, and because the server also has PHP, it's executing it. So now I can execute arbitrary commands here, like date, and then I can do date, and I can say, who am I? And it tells me I'm www data, and so on. I can now execute bash commands up here, just like you did in the ping form, and I get it all from a SQL injection. So it's good, clean fun. All right, so we talked about that. Now here's another issue. When you do a query, if I select name SSN, it will complain that I have a different number of columns. See, when you're querying the name field, you do not know what code the developer wrote. And the developer might have selected the name or the name comma something else. So this is a common trick you do. And let me just demonstrate this one. So let's go back to here. If I didn't go back to my SQL setup, which is here. Okay, so if I put in a name here, let me go back. Okay, herp derper union select is admin. Okay. All right, I'm just going to put it here. All right, if I put herp derper, I get herp derper. Now, if I put union select, okay, and I'm going to do exactly that. Is admin from SQLOL users. Okay. Now here, I've got this extra apostrophe at the end, so I want to put an apostrophe here, and then a comment here. And I think that should do it. All right, let me go back to my example. Let's get back to this one. Here I want to have the raw number column. It's like name SSN from SQL SSN, okay? Name. from SQL SFN. And here, it's not dash dash, it's pound I have to use for a comment. Remember, I often have to try various versions here. That might do it. Now I get this error. The used select columns statements have a different number of columns. You can do a select query that gets some data, and you can union it with another select query, and it will add that data to the end. But you cannot start a result table with only one column and then add more data that has two columns. It has to be the same number. And when you're attacking servers, you don't know how many columns the developer harvested from that database. So you could try various versions. But one thing that's pretty easy is just select 0. If you just select a number, then it just puts the literal number 0 there. So this is an easy way to find out how many columns there are, 0, 0. That one gives me the error. The one with 1, 0 doesn't. So you can make a nice, simple thing with just selecting fixed numbers. And if you Google this, you'll find a bunch of online websites like this. In fact, let me see if I can find them right now. I found quite a few vulnerabilities this way by just searching the web. If I go to Google and I do in URL, select, and 1, 2, 3. There you go. Here's one's about SQL injection. And I may not find one here, but I found them before. Here's the kind of thing you'll see on the web. Select all this garbage. And there are real websites like that, but I may not find them so easily from Google anymore. But here's a real one, I think. No, maybe not. These are all ones about SQL injection, but at one time there were a lot of real websites that had SQL injections up there, and people put them in directories and they get indexed and they're out there. Russian tutorials lead you to them. Anyway, so that's how you find it. Let me see what happened in the chat comment here. All right, why are these websites that are vulnerable indexed by Google? Oh, because Google is just an automated scraper. Like we were talking about earlier, Google also indexes your private files for social security numbers and such because they just run a program that finds every file it can and indexes it. This is why, like I say, currently there's a huge effort to censor the internet. A lot of people asking, why don't you take terrorist videos off YouTube? Why don't you take unpopular comments off Facebook? Why don't you stop putting passwords and social security numbers on Google? In principle, especially to non-technical people, it seems like they could easily just add to their search engine, don't index anything bad. The Prime Minister of Australia thought this. He promised years ago he was going to put a filter on the Australian internet so there'd be no more pornography, no more viruses, and no more stolen property on the internet. And all the technical people tried to tell him, you can't do that. And he said, we are going to do it, we're going to do it, we're going to save all our Australians from all this bad stuff. And it might be good, but there's nothing you can buy that will do that. Anyway, but that's a big issue, and a lot of people are trying to push search engines and content providers and other people into filtering the badness off of what they deliver. We're headed to the world where people will be trying to block all this badness for better or worse. I'm very skeptical about it helping us, but we are going there. All right. So here's the steps. First, you find the number of columns. You can just select numbers, or you can select null. Null, by the way, is better than selecting numbers because the numbers might not match the data type. Null always matches any data type. That's another way to go. After you've done that, you'll find that one null gives you herp and then an empty, which is null. So that shows that there's only one item there. If you want to find a string, you can select a null, 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 a null, 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 a. Because, for example, you want to steal a password. So you don't want to put it in a numeric column. You want to put it in a string column. So you want to find out which column can hold the string. That's one way to do it. You can find the database version. At version is a command that will tell you if it's a certain kind of database. There's other ones, v $version. There are various special command words in different databases. And the reason this is doable is that there are really only 3 or 4 popular databases. Pretty much everything is Oracle, MySQL, or MS SQL. There's a few other things like Postgres, but they're not used very much. So realistically, you can pretty easily try them all. You can find the version here. At version tells you I've got an Ubuntu MySQL database down there. There's one I found years ago, the Montserrat College of Art. They're in San Francisco. I wanted to drive over and meet them. For years, they had the administrator password just blowing in the breeze here. All you had to do was put this union select up here, select username, password, right there in the URL, and I didn't find this. I found the whole thing on a Russian forum, published, indexed by Google. You could go there and see this. I tried to reach somebody there for years. Nobody would talk to me. Nobody would answer my mail. Nobody cared. Eventually, they took it down. Although, to be fair, this is a hashed password. That's an MD5 hash, and I was never able to crack it. So it wasn't quite as bad as you might think, but still, I thought it was unprofessional of them. But eventually, they upgraded their system or something, and it came down. This is the beginning of my white hat career. As I've mentioned before, I've done a lot of this, and I'm still doing it. If you talk to somebody about a security vulnerability, all they do is punch you in the face, if you're lucky. Mostly they ignore you. If you get your attention, they accuse you of hacking them. Communicating to them that they have a problem and they have to fix it is an extremely difficult and thankless job. That's why all the professionals say, never tell anybody if you find anything. If you find something, just let them get hacked. Once they get hacked, then they'll pay for someone to fix it. And until they get hacked, they won't believe you. That is generally the case. I'm stupid enough to keep doing it anyway, but it's an unprofessional activity and not really recommended. Anyway, MS SQL is the Microsoft case. So if I search the address book for Matthew, I find name and email for Matthew, which is fine. So if I want to do an injection here, I'll do Matthew apostrophe and then put in these spaces. %20 is the code for a space, union select null. So I will now do a query with a single null, and that will tell me, if I get this error message, that means the internal search on username is returning some number other than one result, because searching for one null caused this error showing I have a different number of columns. So I try another null and another null, and it turns out that when you put in 5 nulls, you no longer get that error. So the internal database queried 5 fields. So now you want to find a string column. So now I try A, null, 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 and that works, and A appears here. So the first column is a string column. So now I can get table and column names. I select table column names from information schema columns, which is the Microsoft version of the same thing we did. So now I get tables and columns. So the shop items table has columns called price, product ID, and product name. The address book thing has email, name, username, and password. The users table has username and password, so that would look like the goodies to go for. And so now that I know that, I'm going to go to the username table and get username and password, and now I get administrator password, dev password, markets password. This is how easy it is, and there are automated tools that will do it all for you, like Dafydd. So that's why it's such a ridiculous situation with SQL injection. It is very easy to steal everything in sight. And that's as far as I wanted to go today. I have another Kahoot about this stuff. So let's see, not that. If I can find where my Kahoots are, maybe I just need to open them again. Oh, here we are, Kahoots. All right. Fine, I've lost my Kahoots. I'll bring them back.
I thought you logged out or you didn't log out?
I think I closed the tab or something. I don't know. I lose track pretty easily up here. Remember when I was a student, I wondered why my teachers were such idiots, always making obvious mistakes. Now I'm that guy, so I understand it a little better. You're thinking about other things when you're up here. All right. All right. All right, I'll wait a few more seconds. I think 2 or 3 people have fallen asleep. Apparently so. There are always some casualties. So, all right, what SQL method combines 2 queries together? Okay, that's union. What's the point of that injection? 2 nulls. That's how you find the number of columns. Otherwise, putting nulls in doesn't tell you anything. It just tells you how many columns there are. Which one is a free open source database? What's that? It is. MySQL, I think it's been replaced by MariaDB, the latest update or the latest, but anyway, MySQL is the open source one. Oracle is extremely expensive and Microsoft is pretty expensive, but MySQL is free. And now it's, I think they replaced it in Ubuntu with MariaDB and Kali with MariaDB. I'm not sure if MySQL still exists. Is it gone? Or just sort of. What's that? No, it's open source, but I think it fell into disfavor, and MariaDB is the current replacement for it.
Usually when I use open source,
yeah,
databases I usually go for Postgres.
Postgres, yeah, Postgres exists. That's what, but almost nobody uses it except the only people I know that use it is Metasploit. But it certainly is an option. Anyway, and I think MySQL still exists, but MariaDB seems to be the more modern alternative. All right, if this succeeds, what have you learned? That tells you the middle column is a string. It would have given you an error message otherwise. So, Caitlin and Matteo have won twice. And A. Levy has won once. All right. And so that's the winners. All right. So that's it for this chapter. And I will go upstairs to help anybody who wants to work in the lab for a while. I'm going to stop the share unless anybody puts in a chat message. Looks like that's it. Okay.